The wind tasted like ground glass. On the edge of the forward arming and refueling point, a captain with a clipboard barked for a wave-off and pointed at the wall of dust boiling across the flats. A green medevac bird idled in a hot shimmer, rotors thudding, crew chief strapped in, door guns safed and stowed. Near the skids, a woman in a plain, unpatched flight suit stood quiet as a surveyor, counting the gusts with her lips barely moving. No rank on her chest, no swagger. Just calloused hands, a spiral notebook, and a single scuffed glove with a red Sharpie line drawn across the knuckles. The radio crackled, 9-line urgent surgical, dust out, a child and a soldier bleeding in a village that had already lost its light. The captain jabbed a finger at the horizon. Ridiculous. We wave off. The woman didn't raise her voice. If we read the wind right, we don't wave off. We go. Before we launch this story, tap subscribe to Military and Veteran Stories so you never miss these real tales of courage and quiet leadership. And drop a comment. Where are you watching from today? The boomerang-shaped shadows of hangar roofs threw cool stripes across the tarmac, but the heat found you anyway, crawling up from concrete into your boots, into your bones. The day had started with the sort of false ease that fooled new officers: clear sky, long visibility, the kind of breeze that wore a harmless face at sunrise. By mid-afternoon, the desert had remembered itself. Dust climbed in curtains from the wadi and rolled across the training lanes, turning the world the color of old parchment. They called her Eva Morales, Warrant Officer 2, though nearly everyone on this base had stopped using any title for her at all. She moved like somebody with more hours than patches, more mistakes than stories, and more lessons than she preferred to explain. A plain olive flight suit, a web belt gone gray with sweat, a narrow old bracelet woven from green parachute cord, its metal clasp stamped with a rotor wing so faint you only saw it when the sun leaned low. She wore the kind of face that the wind had etched, not hard, just bluntly honest, the squint of someone who had read heat haze for meaning. Her spiral notebook was the only vanity she allowed herself, if you could call it that. On the inside cover, in block letters, she'd written, "Read the wind. Respect the margin. Name the helpers first." Every third page was wind timing marks, little arcs and dots tied to minutes and cardinal directions, a private atlas of invisible currents. She logged them without spectacle, as if prayer was a thing you did with pencil lead. The forward area had been busy all morning with convoy training and Kazivac drills. There's a rhythm to an Army airfield that you only feel when you stop trying to dominate it: the clap of a checklist, the low vow of turbine hum, the sudden laughter that puts shoulders back in their sockets. Crew Chief Specialist Rook. Rooks had been the first to bring Eva coffee, the way young crew chiefs do when they decide to trust somebody before anyone tells them to. He noticed the gloved left hand, red Sharpie line across the knuckles like a quiet scar. He didn't ask. She didn't offer. They worked the pre-flight as if the wind could read their sincerity. Across the chalked-in parking, Captain Trevor Lang stitched himself to a clipboard, a tall infantry officer, handsome in the way recruiting posters like, with the rigid confidence of someone who had built his spine on impossible workouts and perfect answers. He had the HLZ diagrams, the safety annex, the noise abatement policy, and all the command emphasis slides memorized. He also had a way of looking through people whose sleeves didn't carry rank. To him, the unpatched flight suit said, consultant, contractor, temporary. The kind of person who would advise and then disappear before the sand pushed into teeth. When the 9-line hit urgent surgical, 2 casualties, 1 adult, 1 child, LZ dust out, no NVGs available on the ground, possible small arms before dusk. The air picked up the nervous energy of a base that knows its drills and loves its reasons. The operations tent spat out men with headsets and women with maps and a clerk who'd been waiting all morning to be useful. The radio net sprouted braided voices: dust off ready, route green 2, fuel good, weight within margin. The captain appeared at the edge of the FARP like a second horizon and said, "What rules say? Brown out beyond risk tolerance. We wave off until ceiling and visibility." Eva stayed with the wind. She watched packets of grit roll, counted to 6 between the bigger fists of air, listened to the low band like it was a heartbeat. Rook tried to catch her eye. He could already tell what she'd decided, even before she said anything. It wasn't defiance. It wasn't bravado. It was the kind of decision that comes after you failed in exactly this weather and swore you'd make sure the next crew didn't. "Captain," she said finally, voice steady. "The gusts are in sets. 5 small, 1 big, repeat. If we time the approach between the sets and commit tail into wind, we make a clean pad. We'll need a reference pole and a crew chief count. I'll call power margin and commit at 2% above our abort line. We can do this." Lang's smile had edges. "Warrant, you're not signing my risk. You want to be a hero. Find a movie camera." "We wait." Rook churched up a breath and didn't spend it. Flight Medic Sergeant Lila Cohen stepped into the quiet gap. You could tell Lila was the sort of medic who'd done the sad math enough times to hate it. Distance times dust divided by blood. Her voice wore no ornaments. "Sir, the ground call says the child isn't breathing well. The adult's losing more than we can buy with delay. If we wave off, we're not avoiding risk, we're outsourcing it to people without a helicopter." Lang pointed at the edges of the world, which had blurred into tannin. "HLZ is unmarked, wind is unstable, last training. AED said no-go in these conditions. Wait out the weather, it's the safe call." Eva opened her notebook, not as a show, but because page 21 had the thing she needed to say cleanly. Her pencil tapped the margin where she'd written a quiet rule of her own: "Don't ask for permission to save seconds you can prove." She angled the notebook so Lang could see the wind counts she'd been jotting since late morning. 5 and 1 pattern for the last 30 minutes. That gives us 30 to 40 seconds of relative laminar flow between gust clusters. If we arrive at the reference pole 5 seconds before the 6th gust, we set down in the pocket. No guessing, no hope. Just timing. "Reference pole?" Lang scoffed. "This is not a Navy flight deck with fancy nets, it's a shovel," Rook cut in, surprising himself. "Or a picket. Any vertical that the crew can see when the world turns into a milkshake. It sits 10 meters off pad center, so eyes don't lock on the wrong spot when the dust comes. We paint it with IR or tape if we've got time." He lifted his chin a fraction, then glanced down because challenging a captain with a clipboard felt like tugging a lion's whiskers. "Sir." The captain looked at the three of them as if they'd organized a jazz band in the middle of his parade. But the radio didn't care about dignity. The 9-line updated. The child was cyanotic. The adult's bleeding slowed but wasn't stopping. The sun was sliding toward an ugly angle. Somebody on the ground had found an old VS-117 panel and was waving it on a roof like a broken flag. No rotor hazard reported, no wires, but dust that ate the world and would keep eating until night made it fatal. Eva closed the notebook, tucked it into her thigh pocket, and said the line that changed everything. "We're not trying to be brave, sir. We're trying to be accurate." The words fell into the space like hardware. The maintenance chief, Sergeant First Class Willie Hatcher, who'd been tightening a stubborn cowl hinge with polite profanity, looked up and nodded once like a man who'd heard his mother's favorite hymn. He stepped to the captain's side. "Sir, she's not wrong. If they're going, I'll mark their aborts and their power. I trust her margins." "Do you sign it?" Lang asked, softer than he wanted to be. Hatcher didn't flinch. "Yes, sir." Lang's face did the little war that good faces do when duty and fear put on each other's boots. He might have said no. He was allowed to say no. He was even rewarded by some systems for saying no. But Lila's eyes, and the quiet, and the radio that kept delivering seconds like needles, made him small in the right way. He did the thing leaders learn to do when their knowledge has a gap in it. He stepped aside, and he owned it. "Fine," he said. "I'll ride the jump seat and observe. If you deviate from safe practice, I call it." "Understood?" "Understood, sir," Eva answered, because that was a fair arrangement for a world that kills people who pretend certainty. They moved. Hatcher fetched chalk dust and a stake, and made his reference pole from a broken radio antenna and the top of a reflective panel. Rook taped it with a strip that would catch even the last shy photons. Lila inventoried blood, airway, chest seals, intraosseous kit. Eva ran hands on the bird like a piano tuner, touching not the obvious places but the ones that complain when nobody's listening. Fuel cap tightness, wire bundle friction points, collective friction, lock set for a hand that shakes a little under adrenaline and should be allowed to. She paused by the left skid and put her gloved knuckles against the metal, the red line glinting like a ribbon. She breezed out the way people breathe out before stepping into family photographs they'll never see again. "Rook," she said, "you own my eyes on short final. When I say I'm blind, you call me home with clock calls and skid height counts. If I say abort, we abort without argument, no heroes. Lila, you sing the patient numbers the second we're on the pad, breathing, bleeding head to toe, so I know if there's a second lift we need to buy with fuel." Lang climbed in. He held the jump seat strap like a man shaking hands with a stranger he'd misjudged. Eva settled into the left seat. She didn't bless the ship. She didn't talk to ghosts. She flicked the HTAWS inhibit because sometimes the guardian angel screams at exactly the wrong time, and she read the power available like a catechism. Then she did the smallest, strangest thing that starts to make a legend. She tore a piece of paper from the back of her notebook, wrote "Brownout Bible," page 1, and tucked it under the instrument glare shield where eyes could catch it and remember to write down what survived. "Tower, dust off, 3-1, Rook called with a voice that could have sold lullabies. "Launching for urgent surgical, route green 2, will be tail into wind on arrival. We have the dust and the will." They lifted into a world that loved them and hated them in equal measure. The rotors folded the heat. The horizon stepped back. The reference pole waited for their return like a small, stubborn promise. And somewhere out there, in a street whose name mattered only to the people who loved it, a boy tried to breathe and a soldier tried not to die. If you think they made the right call, tell us in the comments. And if you're watching from a place where dust owns the afternoons, say the name of your town so we can pin you on our map. The route brief had been short because the wind did not negotiate. Green 2 was the least bad of the options, a notional corridor traced along an old irrigation ditch that offered just enough terrain depression to lend protection from the worst of the lateral gusts. In clear air, you could see the ditch cut a bruise through the land. Now, with airborne grit playing tricks with distance, it was a rumor the crew verified every half mile, a darker line, a cooler smell, a scrape of water sound like someone washing a stone 3 houses away. Eva kept the bird just below where the gusts got playful, where they could pick at a tail rotor like a bully. Power margin spoke to her through needles and seat of pants and the way the pedals demanded their fraction of leg. She did not narrate to impress. She narrated to make a stable bridge of words between reality and the 3 lives she was responsible for inside the shell. "Power is good by 3, she said, calm. "Tail is happy. We'll ride the ditch for 5, then drift north to the market road. Lila, prep airway first. Rook, you own the world outside. Tell me if any part of it wants to disagree." Lang sat behind them, headset on, notebook balanced against a knee. His training had taught him to document, to make an honest accounting of choices so someone else could learn without bleeding. He'd expected to record bravado or sloppy luck. What landed in his ears instead was a string of small, exact agreements with the day, airspeed, attitude, wind slice, abort line, commit point. Nothing looked cinematic. Everything felt expensive. The ground party came up again, breathless, grateful, burdened by the ugliness of detail. The adult casualty had a through and through in the thigh that had opened when he crawled. A tourniquet warned his leg to keep that blood. The child, a 10-year-old whose name Rook wrote down and underlined because names keep heads level, had breathed like a fish for 3 minutes, then steadied when someone held him upright. No blood on the ground, a good omen that didn't lie as often as people. No power lines, blessed phrase. Though a row of poles along the market road made the crew's muscles remember times, those poles had smuggled lines across the sky anyway. "Copy all," Lila said, pen moving in a neat dance. "We're 3 out. Make the pad center big. If you have smoke, don't. Wind lies to smoke. If you have tape, use it. If you have nothing, stand where you'll be safest when the world disappears and do not move unless we tell you." They crossed a patch of hardpan where dust couldn't lift, and the desert let them see their destination as if to gauge their courage. The village was a scatter of blockhouses and patched roofs, a market square where someone had sunk a new post, a donkey whose patience was the best wisdom on the street. On the roof of a central building, two figures waved a faded VS-17 panel tied to a broom handle. Behind them, adults moved with the careful, floaty gestures of people doing important things inside a dream they couldn't wake from. "Vector to the panel," Rook said, his voice finding the middle of the rotor noise. "Call it bearing 15. No wires visible." "I have your pad middle of the square. We'll favor the roof corner on short final." "Roger," Eva answered. "We'll do a low recon first, assess dust behavior. If it builds faster than our plan, we abort." Hatcher didn't fix this ship just to store our arrogance. Lang scribbled low recon like a student who'd found a teacher. He watched Eva's hands, the easy logic they had with controls, the way small inputs now would spare gross corrections later. He noticed the glove, finally, the red Sharpie line across the knuckles, and he thought it might be a sassy flourish until he saw the way her eyes flicked to it during pedal turns. It was not decoration. It was a memory with a job. They flew a tight, careful circle around the square at a height that flirted with the dust but didn't propose. The rotor wash pushed a skin of tan air outward, and the village exhaled its fine secrets, sand disturbed from cracks, flour dust from a baker's sill, grit that had been waiting in a gutter for exactly this invitation. It did not boil. It rolled, slow and dumb, the behavior of a thing heavy enough to be predictable if you listened. The 5-in-1 gust sets kept their promise. Every sixth wave came taller, meaner, with an edge like torn tin, but between those waves lived pockets that said a reasonable person could work here with respect. "Wind backs 3 degrees on the 6th gust," Rook called. "It will swing our tail at the wrong time. Recommend tail into wind commit, left pedal bias, watch the little street to the south, dust is funneling there." "Concur," Eva said. "We'll offset from the panel by 1 pole to keep the crew out of the cone. Lila, you ready for the door?" She didn't need to ask, but asking told Lang a story about what mattered. "Ready," Lila answered. "I'll dismount on your count. I need 3 meters of clean space, and a human who will hold still while the world disappears." "Ground, dust off." 3-1, Rook transmitted. "You'll see us slow and turn tail to the wind. When the dust comes, do not move unless we tell you. The safest place is where you already are. We are coming to you because you did the brave part first." They set up the approach. Eva took a breath, but not courage. Courage is loud and burns at the wrong time. She took accuracy. She took the length of the helicopter and put it into the air 1 syllable at a time. Airspeed walked down in clean steps. Rate of descent wrote in the palm of her hand, where it could feel honest about itself. The reference illusions started their tricks. Buildings seemed to breathe. The world pretended to slide. The panel grew and shrank against rules, and Rook's voice built a scaffolding around the lie. "Approach angle good," he reported. "Dust starting to wrap at skid height. You're clear of the awning by 2 rotor arcs. Tail has room. Trim is tidy. You're doing great." Lang found himself clutching the strap again and made himself let go. He needed the data. Fear can't learn. He wrote trim tidy in his notebook and felt ridiculous when the words steadied his heart anyway. At 20 feet, the dust decided to audition for godhood. It surged up like curtains yanked by a stagehand who wanted applause. The VS-17 vanished first, then the roof corners, then the donkey, then the lane. The world went to milk. Eva's voice did not change. "I'm blind," she said. "Clock calls now," Rook answered. "You are 2 o'clock. Drift 1 foot right, down 1 foot, hold, tail clear. Wait for the pocket. Pocket in 3, 2, 1, now." The dust hesitated, betrayed by its own rhythm. A thin window opened, where ground visibility shrugged up like a kid trying to see over a rail. Eva stepped the machine into that window with the left pedal already where it would need to be 2 seconds from now. She did not wait for the helicopter to ask a question. She gave it the answer before it could make a mistake she'd have to forgive. "Skid coming in," Rook called. "Down 1 foot. Forward 2. Tail happy. Little more left pedal. Good correction. Down 1. Old. 1/2. Steel. The right skid kissed something that remembered being flat. Eva didn't slap the collective down. She settled it like putting a child into a bed where monsters had learned to mind their manners. The left skid followed. The tail stayed honest. The rotor wash slammed the square back into its own lungs and then, almost shyly, released it. "Hold," Eva said. The word had the clean click of a tuned door learning it was actually a gate. Lila had the door already. She flowed out of the helicopter with the coiled speed of someone who never wastes time and never shows you where she keeps her grief. A man with a tourniquet and a desperate face stood where she'd asked, arm out as if surrendering a child to better hands. Beside him, a boy sat on the roof edge, blue around the lips, his breaths counting pennies. Lila put her palm on the boy's sternum, counted 3, tilted his head, listened like a stethoscope. The heart trusted. "We're okay," she said, which meant we're not going to lose him before takeoff if the gods mind their manners. "Adult first," she called, surprising Lang. "He's the bottle with the hole. Plug the hole, save the tablecloth." She moved like a painter, like someone laying gentleness onto ugly canvas. Tourniquet checked, pressure dressing neatened, a quick jab intraosseous for pain and volume, because veins hide when the world goes to fire. She turned the boy gently so she could see the fight in his chest and gave him a bagged breath that coaxed color back toward the line where life waits to be asked properly. "Two back to us," she told Rook. "I can work the child in the left seat if needed." Adult goes litter. "Skids are safe?" "Skids are safe," Rook said. Awning clear, tail clear, dust polite for the next 20 seconds if the wind keeps its rhythm. Eva watched nothing and everything. Her eyes were on the instruments, but her mind was on the margin, the thin, tender fact that keeps the living on the correct side of inventory. She put her left hand on the cyclic like it was a prayer wheel and let her right hand hover over the collective the way a promise hovers over a table before a toast. Lang looked from one to the other and felt something bend in him that needed to bend. He'd come to witness, to protect his men from dumb risk, to keep the list of avoidable funerals short. He discovered he was watching craft, a discipline he did not own and therefore should not control. His cheeks felt hot behind the headset. He wrote the word craft anyway and underlined it. They loaded with a speed that did not fumble. The adult's eyes rolled toward Lila's voice and steadied like a boat that has finally found keel. The boy gripped Lila's sleeve with the small fist that has broken 1,000,000 hearts and saved more. Rook latched straps with the economy of a mechanic who knows future turbulence and hates what it does to heads. Eva spoke the commit like an oath. "Bringing in power," she said. "Count me." 3, 2, 1, Rook answered, dust surging in 2. Tail clear, up 1. Hold now. The dust did its big 6-gust theater, but the helicopter had already climbed past the lie. They rose out of the square like a polite ghost that had done its haunting without breaking plates. The VS-17 panel returned, shyly. The donkey considered the situation and decided it had seen worse. "Dust-off 3-1 is off the pad with 2 souls added," Rook transmitted. "Inbound your way, gravel strip. We'll take the ditch back. Request direct across the training lanes if the air is clean enough to love us." "Approved," Tower said, sounding a little like they'd just heard a bedtime story they'd needed more than they knew. "And 3-1? Nice work. Name the helpers first," Eva said on intercom, almost to herself. "Good calls, Rook." "Good medicine, Lila. Captain, thanks for riding the strap instead of the brake." Lang swallowed on a mouth that had too much pride sitting on its tongue. He set the notebook down and let his hands be quiet for a while. Outside, the desert resumed its nonsense, dust climbing where it had no business, minor devils sketching spirals in lanes that didn't ask for art. Inside, the helicopter held 3 kinds of breathing and 1 kind of memory that would cure or haunt them depending on how they told it later. They beat up the ditch, slid across the lanes, and made for the gravel strip where a field surgical team had opened its heart. Ground had a litter team waiting, a stretcher that had lived a good life, and a chaplain who understood how to stand near without talking. The helicopter eased onto the pad like a sigh that had finally decided to exhale. As Lila handed the child to the receiving team, she said the boy's name again and made sure the adults caught it. Names make medicine work better. The adult grunt squeezed Rook's wrist once, a simple code, "I saw you." Rook squeezed back, "I saw you first." None of it shows up in logbooks. All of it keeps people from breaking in the small, private places. Lang climbed out of the jump seat and stood on the gravel with his shoulders unwilling to decide between pride and apology. He watched Eva mark her power margins in the notebook with the patience of someone who likes accuracy more than praise. The red Sharpie line across her knuckles flashed once as the sun slanted. He read it as, "Do not cross," because he still didn't know what it actually meant. He cleared his throat. "Warrant Morales." She looked up, more surprised than a person who had just flown a miracle should be. "Sir? I said we should wave off." He made the words walk like men who had not trained for parades. "I was wrong." She folded the notebook and tucked it away. "You were careful. Care is good. Sometimes care needs better math. That's what the wind is, a math problem with sand in its teeth." Lang's mouth finally learned to smile in a vocabulary that wasn't built from recruiting posters. "Teach me the math." "Gladly," she said, then glanced past him at the brigade commander who had come out of the surgical tent, wiping his hands on a towel, eyes gray with honest worry and honest relief. "After we do this right." The commander didn't shake hands. He asked first, "Are my people alive?" "They are," Lila answered before anyone else could audition for hero. "Credit the ground team that held them together and the pilot who found the pocket the wind was hiding." The commander nodded, and his face stepped into that rare expression leaders get when pride and humility figure out how to share the same chair. He looked at Eva and Rook and Lila and, finally, at Lang. "I owe you my thanks," he said, and no one asked him to be louder. They refueled from a skin that had never been as beautiful. The sky kept changing its mind. The dust imagined reasons. The radio rested a little, like a dog with one ear still up. They had saved two strangers and themselves once. The day owed them nothing more. But days don't pay debts. They leave you receipts. Eva set her gloved hand on the glare shield again, half out of habit, half because the paper under it had whispered to be used. She wrote 3 lines on the sheet marked, "Brownout Bible, page 1, count the gusts. Make the pocket, name the helpers first." Rook watched the pencil and felt his spine straighten without permission. Lang watched and realized he had never known the difference between a leader who wants to be obeyed and a leader who wants the work to outlive her. "Part 2 done?" Rook asked, teasing the universe. Eva looked at the sky with a professional suspicion. "The desert rarely gives a story only 2 parts," she said. "Let's be ready to earn the 3rd. The second call came precisely when hope tends to take its boots off late afternoon, when the sun flattens shadows into liars and the heat has made every person on the flight line 5% less patient than they are at dawn. Someone in operations actually said, "You've got to be kidding me," into a live mic and then apologized to the frequency like it had feelings. The 9 line was clipped, nervous, more crowded with adjectives than medevac calls prefer. Single vehicle rollover on a track north of the training lanes. Driver trapped, backseat juvenile with altered mentation. No effective HLZ in the obvious places. Dust worse than the square. Imminent darkness. In the moments after a mission like the one they'd just flown, units either relax into relief or clench into readiness. The difference isn't moral, it's habit. Hatcher ran toward the bird as if his muscles had learned a choreography that never ends. Fuel cap checks, a quick hand to make sure a stubborn cowling latch hadn't retaught itself old tricks, a tap to the belly that told him nothing and everything. Rook stripped and reloaded the cabin like a woman who folds laundry while planning a campaign. Lila rechecked everything she had already checked because checking is the kind of love that medicine trusts. Lang did a thing he would remember years later. As one of the most useful violations he ever committed, he asked if he could carry, not authority. not credit. The stretcher. The IV bag. The box that was either heavy or not, depending on whether it held tools or just the belief that you'd need them. He had no business being on a second launch, but he had better business learning what it felt like to be necessary without being in charge. Permission to ride again? He asked, and he did not look at the rank on anyone's chest. He looked at the work. Eva didn't grant or deny. She made an agreement with the next 10 minutes. Yes, sir. You sing what you see. If you don't know the note, mouth the words. Hatcher leaned in and clipped the reference pole back under the seat. You're going to want this, he said. The North Track lives under dust even on the good days. The airfield gave them the corridor without cleverness. Everyone knew when to get out of a medevac's way. They pushed the helicopter up into a sky that had reconsidered its meanness and decided to double down. Gust sets had shortened. 4 small, 1 big, and the big came with a slash that suggested it had learned to carry stones. Out beyond the training lanes, the world went from tan to amber to bruise. Talk to me, Eva said, not because she was worried, but because talk keeps panic from getting the radio codes. Route is stubborn, Rook answered. Ditch is shallower. We'll take a crosswind if we try to cut distance. Recommend we ride the long dogleg and come at the sight from down sun to keep the worst dust behind the tail. Concur, Eva said. We'll accept the extra minutes and save the seconds that actually matter. Lang wrote, save the seconds that matter, and underlined it. He had command philosophies printed on plaques back on post that said less with more syllables. The rollover sat crooked on a slope that had all the patience of a drunk piano. The vehicle had kissed a ditch wall and then executed a half-hearted handstand before settling on its side. The driver was pinned by the wheel, conscious enough to be afraid the correct amount. The backseat kid sat with his head lolling against the glass, awake but unavailable to reasoning. A knot of soldiers had built a small stone helipad in the flattest patch of dirt like people who had learned that wishing is not planning. Low recon, Rook said. Dust behavior is treacherous. It sheets and then falls rather than rolling. The pocket will be smaller. Understood, Eva answered. She was already adjusting. This was not the market square. This was like trying to set a glass on a table that kept insisting it was a trampoline. We'll stage at 30 feet, read the sheeting, and commit only if we see a down-and-out pocket. Lila, if we can't land, we consider a hover step. Copy. I'll not love it, but I'll do it, Lila said. Hover steps make medics age faster and pilots pray. It's where the helicopter visits the earth like a hummingbird, touching down just enough to trade a human from one body to another while the world tries to shake the bargain loose. They orbited once, the vehicle briefly visible as a wrong-shaped animal in the open. The gust sets lied less here. The big gust telegraphed its arrival with a whispered sibilance through scrub that sounded like a broken cymbal. Eva counted it. She built the approach in that between time where attention keeps its promises. Tail to wind, commit again, she said. We'll put the reference pole on the passenger side of the stone pad. Rook, clock calls from 12 through 6. No poetry, just math. Lila, pack for a lift assist. We may need to tag the driver, then come back on the boy if the pad collapses under dust. That kind of triage breaks you if you are new. If you are seasoned, it distills you. Lila distilled. Driver gets a breath and a bleed check. Boy gets neck support and sugar if he'll love it. I'll take whichever one the pocket pays for first. They committed. The dust did not applaud. It reached up and grabbed like a jealous thing. It sheeted across the nose so fast that the helicopter seemed to push its own face into a pillow. Eva felt the onset through the collective before the eyes told tales. She had already put the left pedal where the future required. I'm blind. 12 o'clock by 2 feet, Rook answered. Down 1. Hold. Tail is clear by a story. Pocket in 4. Wait. 3, 2, 1, now. The pocket this time was a slit, not a window. You could throw a coin through it. Eva shoved nothing. She slewed the helicopter into alignment like a person aligning a hospital bed to a doorframe measured in exact inches, The skids found intent and then matter. The reference pole flickered in and out like a heartbeat that refuses to steady. If you had filmed it, you would have called it a trick. It wasn't. It was craft again, obeying a rhythm that dust had not meant to reveal. Lila vaulted clear with a triangle bandage already in her hand, because necks need respect even when the rest of the story is screaming. The driver met her with eyes that did math. "Can you breathe?" she asked, and his nod was honest but rationed. She slid her hand along the wheel, felt the way it loved his ribs too hard, and found the place where a breath proved itself. "You're doing the bravest thing," she told him. "You're holding still." The boy in the back seat watched her like a person trying to remember a word that would save a house from burning down. "Can you hear me?" she asked, and his pupils yawned instead of answering. She touched his shoulder, felt the sweat of a kid who had just met fear and wanted to trade it for almost anything else. "You're okay to be scared," she said. "We're the kind of scared that helps." 2 minutes, Rook called on intercom. "Pocket behavior is chaotic. Recommend we hover step the driver. Boy may require a second cycle or an in-cabin seat if the world cooperates." Lang held the stretcher like he'd been born with it. He waited at the edge of the cabin for Lila's nod, like a man in church waiting for the right verse. He did not speak to fill space. He watched the dust treat their plan like a rumor and felt his certainty about many things step outside for air. "Hover step it is," Eva said. "We'll kiss the earth, you trade me a human, and then we go." "Rook, count me like you mean it." "I always mean it," Rook said, and the grin in his voice sharpened the world. Eva brought in power the way a parent wakes a child who must go to school, gently and without negotiating the non-negotiable. The skids unweighted. The dust surged. The pocket slit narrowed to a mean smile. Lila met Lang's eyes, and they moved like a choreography learned in a previous life. The driver came toward the stretcher in a river of scraped shirt and apology. The helicopter floated, indecisive on purpose, ready to leave but not rude about it. "Up 1, Rook said. "Hold. Forward 2. Hold. Down 1/2. Steel. Go." They had him. They had him. Lila made the buckle sing and said the small prayer medics say without words, "Stay with me." Eva took that prayer and turned it into altitude. The helicopter lifted back into a world they forgave for now. The boy receded into the dust with a soldier anchoring him by the shoulders and an old woman lifting a hand like she was shooing at flies and fate at the same time. "Back for the juvenile?" Lang asked, needing the yes as much as the boy did. "Yes," Eva said. "We don't leave without writing the second sentence." They flew a quick half-circle to keep the rotor wash from punishing the people they meant to save. The dust tried a new trick, a cross-gust at shoulder height that hit the tail with an insult. Eva corrected before the helicopter could even be offended. She had flown in places where wind invented sins. She had also learned to forgive fast and steer anyway. "Approach 2, Rook said. "Pocket may not repeat. We'll favor the south gutter." Tail still has room. The reference pole looks tired. "Don't we all?" Eva said, and Lang almost laughed because the line let him unclench exactly the right muscle. They tried the slit again and found it even stingier. Lila stood in the door with the triangle bandage ready and the glucose loaded for double duty. The boy blinked as if he could see them better when the dust thickened, which in some backwards physics was true. Dust made them the only moving truth. "I'm blind," Eva said. 3 o'clock by 2 feet, Rook answered. "Down 1. Hold, wait, now. We have a handoff window." The boy came like a package that refuses to weigh what the world says it weighs. The soldier with him didn't let go until Lila nodded the kind of nod that anchors marriages and treaties. Lang slid back, swallowed a cough the dust had meant for his lungs, and held the IV like he intended to keep it dry with dignity alone. "Up," Rook called. "Tail clear. Up, up. Go." They went. The world reached but didn't grip. The desert complained the way it always does when someone steals a small victory from its big appetite. The helicopter climbed into a light that had started to learn evening, and for a moment, all 4 of them were children again, in different towns with different names, believing maybe the good people would win in time for dinner. Back at the strip, The surgical team moved like saints in Coyote Brown. The driver said the name of someone he loved right before the sedative learned their mutual language. The boy whispered the name of a soccer team, and then remembered where his eyes wanted to go. Lila's hands had their own prayers, and they worked. The brigade commander reappeared, not because he loved speeches, but because he feared that gratitude left unsaid turns into something sour. He didn't grandstand. He walked to Eva like a person approaching a porch light after getting lost on a summer road. He touched the helicopter's nose with the back of his fingers, some old superstition about not leaving fingerprints on the thing that saved your people, and said, "Thank you." Eva tilted her head, lit by a smile that had been taught manners by humility. "Name the helpers first, sir. Your ground team did the hard seconds. We just brought the rest." He looked at Lang, and then at Rook and Lila, and ran his thumb over a worry line near his eyebrow that had earned its keep long ago. "I learn something every time I stand near this machine," he said, "and if it sounded like a confession, that's because it was." The sun at last found a horizon it respected. The wind backed off a fraction, a stingy apology they accepted because it contained no brag. Hatcher put his boot on the skid and listened, as if the metal could whisper what it needed for breakfast tomorrow. Lila repacked with the serenity of a person who postpones crying by doing math. Rook wiped dust off gauges with a reverence that made Lang wish more hands in the army learned reverence early. Eva peeled off her left glove. The red Sharpie line across the knuckles had faded some, scraped by the instruments and the dust's small teeth. Lang couldn't help it. "I have to know," he said. "What's the line for?" She looked at him for a long second, not angry, just measuring whether the story would serve anyone but curiosity. "I had a day," she said finally, "years back. Brownout. I grabbed the collective the way pride grabs us all, quick, tight, mean. A friend reached over and drew that line. 'Don't cross the line, the wind sets you, Eva,' he said. 'Put your hand where the machine can forgive you.' He died a few months later." The line didn't. Lang nodded like a man who had found a religion he could afford. He didn't say, "I'm sorry," because grief hates lazy echoes. He said, "Thank you for telling me. Thank you for asking decent," she said, and then she tucked the glove back on because rituals are scaffolding and she had more to build. They finished the second mission the way professionals finish anything, by writing down what the day taught instead of trying to feel it all at once. Eva slid the brownout Bible, page 1, back under the glare shield, added, "Slit, not window commit, only on truth. Hover step is medicine's seatbelt. Forgive the wind quickly, it forgets faster." Rook grinned at the page like a kid discovering a map in a cereal box. Lila touched the edge of the paper with a fingertip, the way a person touches a photo of someone they've met twice but already trust. Lang took a picture with his mind, because some things you should not put on social media even when the world is quiet. Night began to chew at the edges of the strip. The day's receipts lay in the dust like confessionals. The radio, for once, kept its peace. You could feel the airfield hoping, earnestly, for no third call. In that tender quiet, Wade Reed, a young maintenance platoon leader who had earlier in the day laughed at the contractor pilot, counting wind like a librarian counts patrons, walked from the shadow of a tool trailer. He had grease on his thumb and embarrassment cooling along his neck. He stopped at the edge of their circle, not intruding, and spoke into the delicate air. "Warrant Morales," he said. "I was wrong this morning. I confused volume with mastery. I thought the clipboard made me brave." He took a breath that cost him pride and paid him dignity. "Teach me the wind. I'll carry poles, paint reference marks, train our new crew chiefs. I want the quiet ones to know they're allowed to be loud when it keeps us alive." Eva looked at him the way a good teacher looks at a volunteer, with gratitude first, curriculum second. "Deal," she said. "Tomorrow at first light, before the dust has had its coffee. Bring a notebook that loves pencil." He nodded and left with a walk that practiced humility, which is to say, it wobbled once and then figured itself out. They put the helicopter to bed gently. Hatcher tucked the blanket of canvas over the engine cowls as if the ship could catch a chill. Lila stacked empties and refills and wrote down what she'd given away because medicine insists on math even when love wants to skip the ledger. Rook wiped his hands and then wrote his name small in the corner of brownout Bible, Page 1, not as an author, but as a witness. The night took the field with better manners than the day. Stars suggested a ceiling they could live under. Somewhere out there, a child breathed like a boy who would someday tell a story about a helicopter that came out of a dust storm and taught the village the difference between noise and music. Eva sat on the skid for a minute, shoulders down, eyes up. She didn't chase hero feelings. She let the quiet be what it had earned. Then she stood, tapped the glove line once, and said to no one in particular, "See the wind." Then the mission. If you felt that line in your chest, say so in the comments. And if you've ever stood in dust and called a pocket, tell us how you count, 5 and 1 or 4 and 1, so the next crew can borrow your math. Morning in the desert wears a different intelligence. The air actually holds you up, a gentleman's hand at your elbow instead of a drunken shove between your shoulder blades. The dust pretends to have slept in. The light forgives faces for the things they said at sunset. They met in the hangar classroom, which is what you call a corner with a whiteboard, 3 plastic chairs, a coffee maker that couldn't pass a background check, and a fan that thinks it's supervising. Reed showed up first with a notebook that loved pencil, the kind with a spiral you can unwrap when you need wire. He carried 2 pickets he'd raided from the engineer yard and a can of chalk paint he wasn't sure he'd be forgiven for. Hatcher leaned on the door jamb like a kindly sheriff making sure the town stayed a town. Lila brought donuts because she had learned that life is short and sugar is cheaper than therapy. Rook rolled in a portable fan to simulate wind and the optimism to believe it would behave. Eva drew a square on the whiteboard and labeled it HLZ, kindly when possible, honest when not. She wrote, gust sets at the top and under it, 5 + 1, 4 + 1, random fight fair anyway. Below that she wrote pocket types, window, slit, false promise, none. She did not lecture like someone trying to build believers. She taught like a person who expects peers. First principle, she said, we do not worship the dust. It is not a god, it is a behavior. You can read behavior and work inside it. But, second principle, we do not mock the dust. It has killed people who are better than us. We treat it like a big dog we don't know yet. Reed's pencil wrote big dog before his dignity could argue. He felt the room accept him without applause. Maybe the first time in months he'd been comfortable with acceptance that didn't come on a stage. Rook demonstrated the reference pole in the middle of the hangar, and the fan pushed dust from a bag he'd borrowed from the carpenter shop because creativity is just theft with a uniform. They placed the pole off-center because the eye loves lying to you about where the middle is when the world starts to blur. Lila stood where a ground guide might stand and practiced the body language that means, I will not move. She taught the new crew chiefs the clock call cadence, firm, brief, tender, without sounding like lullaby. Pilots don't need lullabies, she told them. They need math in a human voice. Eva walked through commit criteria like she was reading them off a grocery list. Power margin greater than 2% above abort line. Tail clearance greater than a story. Down and out pocket visible. If any of those lie, we wave off. We don't apologize for waving off. We manage time debt by leaving early, by carrying enough fuel, by practicing until we're faster than pride. Reed scribbled time debt and underlined it twice. He raised his hand and lowered it, then raised it again, because humility is push-ups for the soul. What about the feeling, he asked, flushing. You know. That thing where you know it's wrong before the instruments say so. Heard. Eva wrote, gut check, and drew an arrow to abort. Feelings are just fast math with bad handwriting. If you feel wrong before proof arrives, that's your brain running a simulation faster than the dials can. You honor it. Then you prove it to yourself later, so next time the handwriting improves. Hatcher laughed, a quiet gravel slide. I've been calling it the rattle in my molars for 20 years. Good to hear it's math with a hat. They spent an hour on hoverstep, positions, commitments, distributive courage. Lila explained how she decides who goes first when the pocket makes you choose. Bleeders before breathers, if you can bag a breath and buy a minute. But children buy minutes from the heart that the head can't audit. Don't let sentiment kill one to save a beautiful story. The new medics wrote that line so hard their pens nearly tore the paper. Reed asked the question that had been tugging his sleeve. "What do you say to the young ones, the ones who don't talk unless they're sure? I've been training volume." "Train noticing," Eva said without pause. "Ask them what they saw before you. Ask them what they think. People who notice can learn to speak. People who speak without noticing are dangerous in dust." He nodded like someone swallowing a lesson that tasted like shame and relief at the same time. "I can do that," he said, and this time his voice didn't try to be louder than the room. When the informal debrief broke, the brigade commander appeared in the doorway again, this time without ceremony, hands in pockets, face worn in the way of men who carry pictures in their wallets that hurt and help. He watched for a minute from the edge, letting the lesson belong to the enlisted and the warrants. Then he stepped in and spoke like a neighbor who needed sugar. "I won't keep you," he said, and because he meant it, no one braced for a speech. "I came to say 3 things in a kitchen instead of at a podium. First, you saved 2 of mine yesterday, and you did it in a way that taught the rest of us how to be braver without lying. Second, I want that." He pointed to the whiteboard where Brownout Bible had become an accidental title, printed and taught across the brigade by next week. "We'll call it whatever you want. We will not wait for a bulletin to keep people breathing." Third, his eyes landed on Reed. "When a leader says, 'wave off,' it shouldn't be because they don't know the math. Thank you for learning the math." Reed took the kindness like a splint, awkward, necessary, something dignity wears while it heals. "Yes, sir." The commander looked at Eva last. "I'm told tradition demands I pin a coin on you and get a photo." He lifted a challenge coin, then set it on the table instead of reaching for her collar. "I'm also told you prefer we name the helpers first." She nodded, half smiling. "I prefer we keep the machine honest. Coins tarnish. Doctrine lasts." He tipped his head. "Then let's do both in the right order." He slid the coin to Lila, for giving the ground team a language their hands could trust. He slid one to Rook. "For speaking math like a friend at the exact second, a friend is better than a gauge." He left one on the table by the maintenance log. "For Hatcher and his people, who make courage possible with bolts." Only then did he pick up the last coin and set it on top of the Brownout Bible page. "For the pilot who watches the wind like it owes us a report." They posed for a photo anyway, because someday a new private will see it on a wall and ask the right questions. But the coin on the paper mattered more than the flash. After the commander left, Reed hovered with intent. "Request mast," he said, "because some rituals belong everywhere, not just on ships." He waited for Eva to nod, then stood at parade rest and abandoned rank for English. "I'm sorry I treated caution like a trophy. I'm sorry I trained volume. I'm sorry I thought your quiet meant temporary." He swallowed the stone that pride had become and added, "Assign me penance that builds someone else." Eva did not make a speech. She made an assignment. "You'll build a quiet crew," she said. "Pick the ones who notice. Teach them clock calls, reference polls, and how to count gusts. They'll brief every inbound unit for 2 weeks. After that, they'll brief me until they're better than me." Reed blinked. The idea that better than is a goal, not a threat, rearranged furniture in his head. "Yes, ma'am," he said, and when the ma'am slipped out, nobody corrected him. Respect had found its own dress code. The day kept moving because days are rude that way. They flew a training lane to let the new crew chiefs practice calls without blood on the line. They painted reference sticks in IR and in obvious orange because the desert doesn't care which spectrum you favor. They taught the fist signals that mean hold and down and abort to soldiers who'd only ever learned how to wave trucks into motor pools. They wrote 3 more pages in the Brownout Bible. Clock calls are love, not control. Abort is wisdom at speed. The first name on the debrief is the quietest one on the pad. At noon, the chaplain came by with a smile that had the edges of too many funerals. He blessed the helicopter without touching anything and told the rotors they were loved. The helicopter did not respond, because helicopters are not magical, but you could forgive a person for believing the machine felt more cooperative later. Lang, for his part, turned his notebook into a memo he would send up the chain, not to cover anyone but to change the math at echelon. He wrote that, Wave off should never be a default born of ignorance. It should be an informed decision made by crews who know their margins. He wrote that a warrant's craft deserves the respect of a commander's intent. He wrote about the difference between safe and safer, the way one becomes an excuse and the other a discipline. By sunset, they were tired in the good way. No 9 lines had ruined lunch. No radios had demanded a new sin. Reed's quiet crew had named the wind like a choir. Hatcher's people had tuned a whining bearing into a purr. Lila had taught 2 medics how to say, "You're doing the bravest thing," holding still, in a tone that patients believe. Rook had taught a private the art of telling a pilot she's wrong without starting a fight. Start with, "Tail is not happy," not, "You're messing it up." They put the bird to bed again, canvas over the heat the way parents tuck kids while pretending not to watch them sleep. On the glare shield, the brown-out Bible pages sat with a paperclip that had loved too many reports. The red Sharpie line on Eva's glove looked more like a vein in this light, a reminder that bodies and machines share at least one truth: they can be humbled and still be strong. Before she left the hangar, Eva turned to Reed. "One last thing. You'll lead the brief tomorrow. I will sit in the back and say nothing unless you ask. You will name the helpers first, and you will teach noticing. You will not tell a single story about yourself." Reed's grin flickered, then steadied. "Copy all," he said, "even the part that hurts." "Especially the part that hurts," she said, and then she finally smiled the way relief looks when it has done more work than anxiety. Outside, the desert mispronounced forgiveness again in the shape of a soft wind. The stars hung like promises. The radio slept with one ear up. If you've ever had to unlearn volume and relearn noticing, hit like so other quiet leaders find this. And share the rule that saved you when wind, literal or otherwise, tried to turn your day into a story you didn't want told. There are days that brand you with brass and a podium and a ceremony. There are other days that treat you better. They leave you with a notebook full of useful lines, a small bruise where a stretcher bit your thigh, and the sound of a medic telling a kid he was the kind of brave you can teach. Those days do not trend on social media. They trend in the lives that keep trending. Breaths that go on, legs that keep their blood, leaders who learn to put math where ego used to sit. The story the base told that week changed in size depending on who you asked. To the surgical team, it was the day 2 patients arrived in time and a brigade commander remembered to say thank you in a room with bad coffee. To Hatcher, it was a checklist that caught a bearing before it got noisy enough to demand drama, and a young maintenance lieutenant who finally understood that grease under the fingernails is not a costume, it's a diploma. To Lila, it was a boy whose color came back like a dawn she hadn't wanted to jinx, and a driver who squeezed her wrist in the universal code for, "I know what you did." To Rook, it was a page under a glare shield that deserved fingerprints from every crew chief who had ever learned to count 5 and 1 or 4 and 1 and forgive themselves when the dust changed the test without warning. To Captain Lang, it was the day he did his actual job, not to command what he didn't understand, but to learn fast and protect trust while others did the specialized work that keeps a machine from becoming a memorial. He rewrote a paragraph in his standing orders about wave off and go that had previously been about protecting careers. Now it was about protecting lives with numbers honest enough to stand the glare. To Warrant Officer Eva Morales, it was a day where the wind paid its rent. It listened to be read. It argued in the ways it always argues, but it allowed the pockets to be found by those who had written down where they tend to hide. It watched a red Sharpie line cross another few hours in the long ledger of a hand that has learned not to grab when guiding will do. The change that lasts rarely announces itself with a trumpet. It accumulates. One quiet crew brief becomes 5. The whiteboard becomes a laminated card that fits in a pocket and survives a washer cycle. The brownout Bible becomes pages other units. Photograph and adapt, adding local wind lore and field hacks. How a wet burlap sack thrown on a pad can tame the first surge. How to tape a chem light onto a stick so a crew can see motion instead of just glow. How to measure tail clearance in an alley where measuring tapes make bad jokes. 2 weeks later, a unit from another brigade landed at the airfield with dust in their shoulders and fresh pairs of eyes. They had heard there was a team here that taught dust without drama. Reed and his quiet crew ran the brief. Voices even, jokes clean, helpers named first. Eva sat in the back with her arms folded like someone listening to an old song sung in a new key. When Reed got to gut check equals fast math with bad handwriting, the room laughed in the exact right cadence, not to perform agreement, but because they recognized themselves. The violent part of war never needed help making stories. The honorable part does. It requires small lines repeated until they set, careful hands, and the humility to let a hand-drawn diagram be doctrine until the doctrine catches up. It requires the dull courage to apologize before your mistakes turn into funerals, and the sharp courage to raise your hand for work you don't own the vocabulary for yet. That's why, when the base public affairs officer asked for a human angle to wrap a post about the medevac missions, Eva suggested they write about Rook teaching clock calls to 3 privates who reminded him of himself at 19, about Lila showing a young medic how to talk to a frightened child without stealing the child's agency, about Hatcher braiding confidence into bolts, about Reed swallowing pride so his voice could become scaffolding for other voices. The post did fine. More important, the briefs filled up the next month with people who had read about craft and decided to enroll. There's a temptation, in stories like this, to insert a late twist, a surprise admiral stepping from a doorway or a secret handshake that resets a room. But the military is not a stage. It is a ladder you hold for each other while roofs get patched in wind you do not control. The closest thing to a twist was this. In the months after those dust days, calls for wave off on that base declined, not because people became reckless, but because they became literate. They learned to count. They learned to ask better questions. They learned to fail early in simulation, in training lanes on whiteboards, so that the real world had fewer chances to make their education expensive. One evening, long after the coins had found pockets and the notebooks had traded paper for muscle memory, Eva stood by the helicopter and did the small inventory you do when endings want to disguise themselves as pauses. The glove still had its red line. The paracord bracelet had frayed into a softer green. The notebook had coffee scars and the lightweight arrogance beaten out of its staples. She wrote one more line on the brown-out Bible, more epilogue than instruction. Respect outlives applause. Rook limped up with 2 cold bottles of water and a grin that had caught a sunburn. We put 3 crews through the slit today, he said. Nobody pretended it was a window. I heard a private correct, a lieutenant with enough respect that the lieutenant said, "Thank you," out loud. Miracles, Eva said, and meant it. Lila joined them, tucking a small poem into the flight bag, the kind she kept on a note card, written in letters careful enough to stand on ceremony if asked. One of the kids from that first day sent a drawing, she said. It's a rectangle with 2 ovals and an angry sun. The rectangle has a smile. The helicopter has a smile? Rook asked. The pad has a smile, Lila answered. I think he got it right. Lang wandered over with his sleeves rolled past rules and a face that had rehydrated a little since last we saw him. I sent your pages to 2 battalions, he said, sheepish, because sometimes good news feels like bragging. One of them wrote back and asked how to measure tail by a story. I told them 8 to 10 feet depending on the building, but the real answer is the crew chief's voice. Smart answer, Eva said. Send them Rook's number. I did, he said. I also sent them Lila's line about children and minutes. They wrote back 2 words. Thank you. They stood for a long minute without needing to fill it. It's a luxury silence that doesn't demand to be solved. The wind behaved like a well-mannered guest. The stars tried on their outfits, and the base exhaled a day that had the decency to be ordinary. If you're still with us, that means you know where the story's real reveal lives. It isn't a surprise rank stepping from a hatch. It's competence revealed under pressure, humility that doesn't need a microphone, doctrine that fits in a pocket before it finds a manual, and leadership that counts gusts before it counts likes. So here's the moral we hope rides home with you. See the wind, then the mission. The atmosphere, literal or cultural, will try to knock you off the pad. Don't wave off every time from fear, and don't commit every time from ego. Read. Own. Name the helpers first. Credit builds crews. Crews save lives. Train noticing. The quiet ones aren't quiet because they don't know. They're quiet because they're busy seeing. Teach them to speak math in a human voice. Abort is noble. The bravest line on any page is the one where you turned away before the pocket lied. Write it down. Tape it to the glare shield of whatever you fly, drive, lead, or love. If this story gave you goosebumps, say which moment did it. The "I'm blind" clock call ballet, the hover step under a slip pocket, the apology turned assignment, or the brownout Bible being born with pencil and stubbornness. Subscribe to Military and Veteran Stories for more true tales of craft and courage. Tell us in the comments where you're watching from, and if you've ever had to count gusts of wind, of doubt, of noise, share your math so someone else can land in the pocket you've already mapped. And tonight, if the wind rises where you live, step outside for a second. Listen. Count. Somewhere, a crew is doing the same, and your quiet respect might be the softest, strongest gust they meet.